That's part of it. If it were not AP, it wouldn't be hard. And so it's always going to be a puzzle that we're trying to unravel. So today what we're going to talk about is continuing with the discussion about how to analyze structure, because that's one of the first things the College Board is going to present. So I did the little YouTube just talking about how everything in our lives is organized. And so right now what I want to do is just pull you quickly back through the 2009 AP passage or from the drama, Shakespeare's play, Henry VIII. Then what I'm going to do in a separate video is go through the other paired passage we did with the bard, owl, and the history teacher. And all I want to do very quickly is focus on the structure and how the structure is working. So if you look at the quick 5 steps that we have here, let's pull back through for just a second. Mark the main ideas. So as you read the passage, what you're going to do is mark the main ideas out beside each stanza or section if it's a prose passage. Then begin to make the connections. Look and say, okay, this is one main idea. Here's a second one. How are they connected to each other? Are they complementary? Is it developing an idea further? Or is it a contrast? If it's a contrast, we need to begin to ask the question, why? The third step, just continue. Do that all the way through the passage. Mark a main idea. Compare it to the next main idea that's coming. Mark a main idea, compare it to the next idea. When you get several stanzas down or passages or sections down, then go back to the beginning and begin to see what is the main movement I'm beginning to see emerge. Number 5, then, by the time you get to the very end, after you've zoomed all the way out in number 4, you have to decide if the structure is something important enough for you to discuss in a free response essay. If it is a technique or strategy the author is using to function in a particular way, to make a particular impact. And if so, of course, you have to decide what that is. But these are the steps you can take to get you to the point whether or not you think it's going to be important. So let's very quickly look at this poem one more time. And yeah, I just got off of there. So let's go back. Let's read it together. And we are going to zoom in just a few minutes to talk about what each thing is doing, so then we can kind of zoom out and talk about the impact that it really is making. It begins, and make sure as always that we carefully read the prompt, and it talks about he's alone on the stage. That's a soliloquy. And then we're to read the speech carefully because it's going to be a detective mission, in other words, trying to solve the mystery or the puzzle, unravel the puzzle. Write the essay in which you analyze how. It's always about how because that's the key word you're going to see throughout the stems for the AP lessons that they're teaching. It always says, how does it function? Function is how. How is an author crafting the poem or the passage? How does Shakespeare use elements such as, so these are options, allusion, figurative language, and tone. You're going to have to remember all the different types of figurative language, simile, metaphor, personification. Those are some of the main ones. Tone is always going to be important. If you misread tone, you misread the entire passage or prompt, and you'll receive no credit probably. How are those things used to convey Wolsey's complex response? It's always going to be complex because it's going to be complicated, to his dismissal from court. And so there's the context of what has happened. So let's begin. So farewell to the little good you bear me. Farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness. Those 2 lines seem to go together because as he shifts to the third line, he says, this is the state of man. So we pull out into the margin and we just say, okay, so what's the main idea? He seems alone on stage and he's just talking to the guys who've just walked off, and he kind of transitions through a couple of feelings. Well, okay, great news you brought me, good riddance to you. And then a little bit of a shock. Really? Like this is it? And then the realization that it's a long goodbye to everything he's ever had. What would his greatness be? That's where we zoom in and we draw inferences and we make all of those level 2 associations there that we can use in commentary. It's his authority. It's his sense of power, his achievement. Everything he's built his life on is suddenly gone. We move into this next section then, and we just have to see how far it's going to kind of group together. This is the state of man. Colon, notice the punctuation. So this becomes almost philosophical. This is personal. This is a movement. It's being structured or organized where he's beginning to state something about life in general and mankind, regardless of time or place. This is his state, his tendencies, what he tends to do. Today, he puts forth the tender leaves of hope. Tomorrow blossoms and bears his blushing honors thick upon him. The third day comes a frost, a killing frost. And when he thinks, good easy man, full surely his greatness is a ripening, nips his root. What? The killing frost. Nips his root, and then he falls as I do. Then he begins to move into the references to the swimming boys. So this is all grouped together. So what's the main idea there basically? Well, what he's talking about and what he's using is an analogy, that's his technique or strategy, to a plant or a bush or flowers. And then we would begin to really zoom in to defend it with evidence about the passage of time, today, tomorrow, the third day. We see that pattern, see how it's organized. And then we also see the pattern in the organization from the tender leaves that start on a plant to the blossoms to the blushing honors. It's in full bloom. But then the killing frost comes. How does a killing frost come? Unexpectedly. It comes suddenly. It comes without warning. Everything is shocking to him. And so that is how it begins to come upon him. So, what's the main idea here? It describes his shock, the sudden change of events, and he's doing that through this extended metaphor or this analogy. The tone then becomes extremely important because it is a little bit shocking, but it does, I apologize, it does kind of continue with that philosophy that it's not something that's just to him only, relevant to him only, but that's just the state that man tends to do. We think we can't be impacted or affected by anything. He moves on to the third little group about the boys, like I have ventured. And then notice how he's positioning himself within here to focus on his own admission and his part in this. So while this was philosophical and kind of a global focus, this becomes more personal. I have ventured like, so this long extended metaphor simile, the little boys kind of reckless and careless, more of our zooming in there, on these air sacs. And they're swimming out on a sea of glory. What about that diction and connotation? Great victory, success, everything seems to be wonderful and blessed, but far beyond my depths. My high-blown pride at length broke under me, and now has left me weary and old with service, to the mercy of a rude stream that must forever hide me. So this section begins to work together as well. The tone somewhat shifts a little here as he takes some of the blame upon himself, almost a little self-incriminating or rebuking himself for being so foolish like these boys would be. We see the contrast. See here, the sea of glory contrasts with the rude stream now that he is on. So we see some of those details we could pull into an analysis as well. And rather than being a prominent position, in a position of authority, he is being hidden basically, as he is just going to move into a life of obscurity. Then we get the next line, vain pomp and glory of this world, I hate ye, with an exclamation point. That seems to stand alone, kind of back more to a philosophical view of just the state of man and what we strive for and think we're going to accomplish. But it is vanity in the long run. It's all gone, it's all lost. Then he moves again. I feel my heart new open. But let's go back. See that exclamation point? Vain pomp and glory of this world, I hate you. What about that tone? What do you think about that shift in the tone there? That's almost disdain, frustration, extreme anger and aggravation. Then he says, I feel my heart new opened. Oh, how wretched is that poor man that hangs on princes' favors. There is betwixt the smile we would aspire to, that sweet aspect of princes, and their ruin, more pangs and fears than wars or women have. He pulls back out to talk in general about people, perhaps people especially in positions in the court or in a position where their whole future depends upon the admiration, appreciation, indulgence of someone who has authority over them, and yet how that's always a very tenuous situation. And so he has a little bit of a recognition there. It's just part of the job. It's part of what comes along with that position. He just didn't see it coming. And then at the very end, we have the illusion. And when he falls like Lucifer, never to hope again. Lucifer is one of is God's most handsome angel who aspired to have equal power. Pride led to his fall. And once he was cast into hell, he wasn't going to get out. There wasn't going to be an, oh, gee, mess that up. Do you think I could come back? Never to hope again. And so there is that sense of hopelessness, that sense of resignation acceptance, even though there's still that little bit of anger. So as we move through these things, we would talk about how Shakespeare develops this idea of his emotional response through these metaphors and through these analogies, through the use of syntax, diction. But what we're looking at overall in the structure is, what is it really telling us about his response to his dismissal from court? So then we're going to look for some purpose verbs. In other words, what does the structure? It mirrors something. Does it represent something? Does it reveal something? Does it emphasize something? So here's just a little example I put together, and I want you to see my mistakes, because we're always, as we write, choosing better ways to say things. Perhaps the structure mirrors his complex emotional response as he processes the news, expressing resentment and anger, becoming philosophical at times, but also seeming to find a sense of resignation and acceptance. So we're answering the question. These are indeed his emotions that he's moving through, and that seems to be represented in the structure. So think about that, rewatch if you need, but that is one of the things that you could discuss, is how that movement reflects his emotions. And then we will look at the paired passage quickly as well. But do you see the movements that we're kind of talking about? Mark the main idea, what's being discussed here. Then you begin to connect. Well, this one's a little bit different from this one. This one's a little bit different because he accepts responsibility than the philosophical aspect of what mankind tends to do. Continue all the way through doing those moves, then zoom out all the way at the end to decide, is the structure important, and what could I say about it in regards to theme or in regards to answering the question. Okay, that's your 5 for 5. Thanks.